Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Drive and Dish NBA podcast. My name is Kevin Rafuse. Of course, welcome back to my co-host, Justin Cousart. You heard him on last episode. Justin will not be joining us this episode. He'll be checking in later this week as free agency gets underway. But, I don't want to say he's on paternity leave anymore. He's definitely back in effect. But I did at the end of last episode tease this one, the return of my guy, Andy Jordan. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at Andy's Magic Minute. We're not going to talk about his hat. We can talk about that later. Honestly, I can't talk. The Phillies made the World Series last year, but Andy's Braves are destroying everybody right now. We'll get into some baseball. Yeah, everybody's hot in June, but we'll get back into baseball a little bit later in the show. But happy to have Andy back. We're going to talk a lot of draft as well, a full in-depth post-draft recap. But of course, we do got to warm up. Andy and I met in Orlando initially. That's where our connection is from. Of course, if you're a longtime listener, I lived in Orlando for 5.5 great years. I do love the city, beautiful still. But this is a guy who's near and dear to our hearts, Mr. Nikola Vucevic, Magic legend. I think it's fair to say borderline legend for that franchise.
No, legend. He's got the numbers.
Yeah.
Obviously not the team success that some of our better players have had, but from a numbers perspective, you can't ignore his longevity and how good he was, right? We can argue about team success, but at the end of the day, the individual was a producer. He made a couple of All-Stars with the Magic. He's definitely one of the better ones.
Well, and he embraced it too. I think that's the most important thing. Is like he liked being the face of that franchise. But Nikola Vucevic signed a 3-year extension with the Bulls, $60 million. Of course, you and I agree that the Vucevic trade from the Magic to the Bulls did the Magic a whole lot of dividends as well. So our guy Vuce on the way out, between the first rounder and of course Wendell Carter Jr., who's refound his success down in Orlando. But the extension for the Bulls. Look, Vooch is getting older. They gave up a lot to get him. It feels like they're not going to go in the tank. They want to try to stay competitive here a little bit. And it just doesn't seem like they had a lot of choices, honestly. But at the same time, though, Andy, I look at this contract and my initial reaction is, oh, is that what the Bulls should be doing right now? Like 60 M's for Vucevic when he's blatantly on the decline?
I'm dying to see the details of how that contract is broken down, right? Like the Wellman front office is legendary for starting high and then decreasing, which a lot of teams lately are starting to do. So maybe that's the case for him, and maybe becomes a little more tangible as he gets older. He becomes more tradable, assuming that it's just a straight 20 mil. Yeah, I'm a little surprised by the Bulls because I thought this was a good time with Vucevic being a pending free agent. I think DeRozan has 1 more year left, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
And then Zach LaVine obviously has the longer contract, but he's also the most tradable asset. If you were going to blow it up, this was the time. Obviously, they're not going to do that. You do not sign Nikola Vucevic for 60 mil, 3 years, if that is what you are intending to do. Again, I want to see what that contract is like. If he's starting at, 28, 29 a year and then ending around like 18, that's actually a very tradable contract at the end. Because he's the kind of player, in my opinion, is still going to be productive when he gets older. He doesn't depend on his athleticism. He doesn't depend on any of his quickness. He's really just a very sound offensive player. That is his key mark, right? He's a good shooter for his size. He's a smart player. So as he gets older, he's not really going to get worse, at least not much. So I'm a little surprised by it. I really thought this was a time for them to consider pivoting. But obviously not, right? Obviously they're going to continue to go out there and try to make something happen, but which they can now because we got both of their picks. So if they make the playoffs and are good next year, don't really bother me none.
Yeah, it's a fundamental question of why, I guess, with the Bulls, and that's and like you said, because they've had so many outs, like with Vooch being the free agent, like you mentioned, and unfortunately because of the health of Lonzo Ball, Lonzo Ball is, there are very. Like at this point, if he plays NBA basketball again, I think everybody would be truly surprised. And we're obviously all rooting for him, but that's just the sad reality of it. It feels like when that happened, that you just kind of hit your best version of this team. And it is the time to start blowing it up and move on. they kind of hit their ceiling. Like they were able to push
Well,
the Heat a little bit. They hit their playing game. They have good players. Like DeRozan showed that he still has a little bit in the tank. I think he would be valuable on a couple of the contending teams. I think
definitely.
Zach LaVine, like you said, still has a ton of value. I mean, a little bit of injury risk there, but when he's
Patrick
going, he's going.
Williams may have some of the highest value of them all because he's
Yeah.
in a very cheap contract. He's a very productive player. So they have good teams. To me, it's similar to the Portland situation. Not to talk about Dame because I really don't feel like talking about that. But like it is a business at the end of the day, and some of these teams are more content with the illusion of good being just mediocre. Fans hate it, but front office where money really is the driving force, yeah, it takes a lot of gusto to say, you know what, let's blow it up. So kudos to, again, not to talk about the Magic all the time, but that took a lot of guts because you had a team that was, fighting very mediocre, but they saw it like, we're not going to get much better than this. This is the time to do it. Let's cash in and start. And look, a couple of years later, we're a lot better off than we were doing that run. It takes a lot of courage to do that, which is surprising me about Portland because they have awesome pieces with Sharp, a cheap Anthony Simmons. They just got the number 3 pick. Like, this was the right time to just be like, all right, let's cash in on Anthony. Let's cash in on Damian. Grant is a free agent. Let him go. And let's just build around our 2 little studs. They decided not to do that. Same thing with Chicago. They're going to milk it until it's done. And then they're going to be forced to blow it up. And that is not a situation you want to be in either.
I'm so with you on Portland. We're going to be forced to talk about Portland all summer, and I'm already tired of it. And I'm glad that at least that there's a general consensus is that we're all tired. And we will on this episode, obviously, with them drafting Scoot Henderson, somebody who I do think is a good player. And I'd have taken Scoot at 2 personally. Again, we'll get into the draft a little bit later. But yeah, with the Bulls, it's just one of these things where I think it's clearly time to move on. They're not getting the writing on the wall. And like you said, they could rebuild. It doesn't have to be a super ugly rebuild. Like, you could get back a lot because you have good players on that roster. You're not an expensive, mediocre team who kind of has to suffer for a few years. Like, I think about when Brooklyn post the KG and Paul Pierce trade, when they really were just stuck in the trenches and had no picks and terrible contracts. And it just took 3 to 4 years of them being awful with nothing they could do just until they got the money off their books. Like, that's the worst situation to be in, I think, where you're just absolutely stuck. I don't think Chicago needs to be stuck. They just continue to, it's the meme where you're riding the bike and you put the wrench in your front tire and you're tripping yourself. And that's just what it feels like the Bulls are doing here a little bit. And Portland like that to an extent as well. And Damian Lillard on his own to an extent as well. I do want to stay sort of out west. Half of this is out west. There was a trade as well. Finally, the John Collins rumors are at an end. My man perpetually has been on the block and now has a home as he's headed to Utah. Going back to Atlanta, it's Rudy Gay and a 2nd-round pick. And Andy, I don't know about you, but my first initial reaction was, wow, that's surprisingly. I know John Collins is on a big contract, but this is a guy who's been productive at times. That's feels like not much to give up at all.
Look, there's certain GMs you don't trade with, in my opinion.
Yeah,
Danny Ainge is one of them.
Yeah,
because I joked around. Here's what he just did. He gave up a player that really is just with all due respect, with Rudy Gay's great career, and I'm going to mention Rudy Gay later on in today's episode. At the end of the day, he wasn't really an impactful player anymore for the Jazz, right? That's not his role anymore in this stage in his career. And a 2nd-round pick, which is absolutely worthless. And you got John Collins, who for a couple of years was a 2010 guy, high volume, 3-point shooter. You're going to flip that. You're going to increase his trade value before the season's over, and he's going to somehow flip him for some young player and or a 1st-round pick. Like, that is what Danny Ainge saw, is basically someone who has an auction license to buy a car. So, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and buy that Beamer for $5,000 because I'm just going to go ahead and flip it for 10 in a couple of weeks. That's exactly the way he's looking at John Collins. Atlanta was desperate. The new CBA is going to force a lot of teams to make kind of these trades to save that money, not get those luxury hits, right? So that's what they saw. And I guess the best thing for Atlanta is that you send them to the West. I'm surprised they couldn't get much more, but maybe that wasn't their intention. And now we're hearing rumors that maybe some of their other veteran players are available. Um, I think they're trading the wrong guy, but that's another conversation we need to have, because I am not a fan of Mr. Young there, and I think all the stuff that they do to build around him, that's the wrong person to build around.
Well, so you got 3 points. So I'm going to try to hit all these in order because I want to stay with Utah for a second, because you're right. I think if you're Danny Ainge, you look at this and go, even if nothing, like John Collins is going to be 26 years old when the season
Yeah,
starts. He's still young. I know he's been in the league for a while, but like this was a guy who was essentially a double-double machine in Atlanta at one point. I know there's been a little bit of up and down, but I mean, he was a part of that team that made the conference finals. Like, to me, it reminds me almost of like the marketing situation of where it's like, hey, there's still a ton of upside there potentially if he bounces back to who he was. You know, you either have a good player who you probably keep on the roster, or you have somebody who maybe he shines in a limited role, or a more increased role, I should say, on that Utah team where he's obviously going to have a way more focal point of that offense. And then you can trade him to a contender and get double the value for him. So from that sense, yeah, I think this makes all the just it makes all the sense in the world for Utah. It's a no-brainer
yeah, no brainer.
flyer, especially for what you give up. You gave up a second rounder in Rudy Gay, who, like you said, Rudy Gay's had a great career. He's just older at this point. Like, you definitely do that to get John Collins every single time. For the Atlanta trade, that my initial reaction is to go, well, if I'm praising this for Utah for how little they gave up, it has to be a disaster for Atlanta, right? I think it's CBA implicated, like you said, and
Yeah.
it's just if they want to keep that team together, if they had kept John Collins, I should say, with how much money he's due, they'd have been in that second threshold. And that Atlanta team is not good enough to justify being in that second threshold. Like, they're not a piece away from contending. They were in the play-in game last year, and then they got knocked out in the first round by Boston. Like, that's not a team you go into the second level of the luxury tax for. Now that you moved on from John Collins' salary, it just gives you more flexibility. You know, you can bring Murray back for another year and evaluate the fit again with him and Trae Young having a full off season together and not kind of a last minute trade. You know, you can bring a Kongwu back who's been really good for them. You can bring Sadiq Bey back if you want, who you traded for. Like, that to me, I don't know. Like, I do like that increased financial flexibility when I look at that and ways to optimize that roster. Like we said, it's, you don't want to be stuck in that middle. You don't want to be really
They're,
expensive and
they're
not
going to
that
retool.
great.
They're going to retool. They're going to
Yeah.
take this opportunity and retool, right? They stay with Sadiq Bey, and maybe now they look to move Hunter, who has value, or Bogdanovic, right? So, like, they're going to try to get rid of some of those longer contracts and build with some of their newer, younger players. AJ Griffin is there. You know, he's a lights out shooter. So I think that's going to be their approach. They're going to retool, not necessarily rebuild, right? I think there is a slight difference between the two. And I think that's what they're doing. It's still just a mismanaged of asset, because you could have got a lot more for John Collins last year.
Yeah, I mean, and really any of the other years. I mean, he's been
Mm-hmm.
on the block for so long, and it is funny then. So he signed the extension, but you figured maybe he'd play it out. Yeah, I mean, I'm with you in the sense that it's a retool as well. I mean, if they were going to rebuild, they would. If they're going to hit the
Yeah.
rebuild button, you trade Trae Young. Like, that to me is we're waving the white flag on this roster.
That
We
would be
don't
the
believe it
best
can get
move
to a
they can make.
championship. Well, so I go back and forth on Trae Young, and I really, because I think he's a supremely gifted offensive
Yes.
player. I've seen him take teams to the conference finals. Like, I saw him take Boston down individually. It felt like in 2 games this past series where, you know, it was really him stepping up and getting it done. I also think, of course, he is a tremendously flawed defensive player, and there are just limits on it with his size. Like, there's only so much you can do on that front. And I do get the point that, you know, he's a ball stopper a lot. For as gifted offensively as he is, a lot of times the ball is either in his hands and it's not moving at all, and they're taking a lot of isolation. Now, the counterpoint to that would be that Trae Young is one of the best isolation players in the league. So if that's who you have on your roster, you go for it. I mean, I know you're firmly in the trade camp. I know you don't think he's the guy that you build around. I'm still not convinced he can be the number 1 guy on a championship team. I'm still hesitant to blow it up, though, at the same time. Like, I
Well,
want to see
look,
what you got with
if
Murray.
you're Atlanta, you would be an idiot to blow it up at this point, right?
Yeah.
Retooling, I do think it's the right approach. Again, it is a business. You do have talent. for all my Trae Young quote unquote hate, because I'm sure I'm going to have a bunch of people come at me because of this, I'm going to make it clear. I think Trae Young is an exceptional, talented player. Numbers don't lie, right? His numbers are amazing. Numbers don't lie. He's also a career 35% shooter from three. So for being a shooter, he's basically average for like the last 6 years. But anyway, that's a different thing. But in regards to my opinion on Trae Young, why don't I build around him? I see him very similar to guys like Stephon Marbury, guys like Sharif Abdul-Rahim, guys like a Rudy Gay. All-star talented players, right? Stephon Marbury was a beast. Every team he left got better after he left. There's just certain players that are not, they're number one talent, but they're not going to give you number one results from a team perspective. So yes, Trae Young as a number one option is going to do what he's doing now. 28 points, 11 assists. I mean, he's a machine. You're not going to win, right? Stephon Marbury, look it up. For those of you guys who are not old enough to know Star Murray, right? 20 and 10, beast of a one-on-one isolation player. Every team had left, got better after he left. I promise you that if Atlanta had the fortitude to trade Trae Young and utilize Murray as their main point guard and just get as much as you can for Trae Young, that team will be better. Unless Trae Young changes something about his approach to the game when he's okay stepping back, which I do not see in his persona. He's a very alpha dog. He's going to be a great talent that does a lot of great things that won't win. And ultimately, what is it that you want to do? You want to win. So that's my straight opinion. It's not his talent. It's not, empty stats. No, they're real stats. He's doing that. He's not going to win. And it's not about who he has around him, because Atlanta has done everything in their power to put great people around him, right? They made the Eastern Conference Finals. I thought it was a fluke. I think I've been proven right ever since then. I did not buy them the following year. I didn't buy them last year. And look at their talent, and they just made the play-in. What's the consensus there? Trae Young. It's just that. You say isolation player, ball dominant. I think I saw a stat, I shared it with you, where Atlanta was the number one team. Then in offensive plays, they passed the ball, 4 times or less?
Yeah.
Right? Like, in other words, they don't have any ball movement. It's basically what the stat was saying. They're the number one in the league. 10% of the plays had more than 4 passes. That's a horrible stat.
Yeah.
So,
and that's
no.
Oh, and that's my greater point. I guess my worry, if Trae Young is going to make that to be the true number one guys, I'm with you. I need to see him be more in the flow of the offense. And to that point, I think I agree with you where there's a ceiling on how far they're going to go with the way he currently plays. I think if he gets more, again, within the flow of the offense, and we're going to find out this season. I mean, because we're going to run it. There aren't really many excuses. He's going to have a great coach in Quinn Snyder next year, who is proven in this league. You can't blame the Murray adjustment because they're going to have an offseason to work together, and you hope that partnership bears fruit. Like, that would be the best case for Atlanta, is just this roster retools a little bit. They're more well coached, and then it could justify taking another swing at this. And you can say, hey, we're ready. We just, few down years, we're ready to go. But I'm with you. Like, if this team is floating around 500 again, where they more or less been for the past 3 years since that conference finals run, I think you have to ask yourself, is it worth it anymore? And do we make more substantial changes? The quickest way to substantially change that roster is to trade Trae Young. I mean, having Murray there is different, and Murray still has value, but I think he probably has less than he did coming out of San Antonio. Like, I don't know. I don't feel like between injuries and a couple other things, like, I don't think Atlanta really helped it in his first season.
I think he took a PR hit more than anything else this summer. His numbers are still good. He's still a really good basketball player. I think his PR, just all of a sudden he leaves San Antonio and some things were said about him, and all of a sudden he's on videos for the wrong things and slapping people upside the head and pro-amps. Like, you're a professional basketball player, bro. Like, you really shouldn't be doing that. But I think as a player, I think he still has value. But yeah, that's my opinion on Trae Young. It's not his talent. He's a great talent. But he's a shooter who shoots average from 3. That's not me talking. Those are the stats. Right? That is not like me. I'm dissing him. He is an average shooter. Average shooter is what, 35% from deep? That is literally what he shoots from his career. Yes, he can hit it from half court, but he's still 35 from deep. That's his average. And I just don't think you can win with him unless he changes. Based on what I've seen from him, I don't know him personally, but he looks like a very dominant alpha dog personality, which makes him great to a certain degree. I don't know if he's willing to step back and let someone else run the show. And I don't mean like necessarily running the offense, just saying playing off that more than just everything has to go through me. And until he changes that, they're not going to win. That's just, again, I gave you few examples, and I'm sure I can come up with others of all-star level players who just did not win.
Leave us a review on iTunes, good or bad. We'll read them on the podcast. If you're not an Apple user, Google Play Store, Spreaker, Spotify, TuneIn, Amazon Music, Stitcher, which I just found is shutting, or I found out is shutting down today. So RIP Stitcher. We've had some great numbers on there over the years. So salute to everybody who's been listening there. Again, anywhere you can find a podcast, you can find us. You got plenty of other options, at least. Watch the podcast on YouTube. Just search Driving Dish NBA podcast if you want to watch a visual form. See Andy and I. You can see Andy's Braves hat. I'm still working on. I really got to work on the background a little bit, but you know, you can see us just chatting and all that fun stuff. And now a word from our sponsors. All right, so I do want to come back and, of course, get way deeper into the draft. Justin and I briefly touched on the draft now last week, but, want to go, much more into our winners and losers and what we think surprised us and what panned out certain ways and what didn't and yada, 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 all that fun stuff. But I guess I'll ask you, because, I know the Magic are going to come up at some point, so we'll get into that later, but without mentioning Orlando at all, I guess if you have one team that stood out to you the most from the draft where you said, man, I really love what they did, other than the Spurs, obviously, with drafting Wemby, which is just the easiest pick of all time. Yeah. Who really stood out to you though?
I think the obvious ones are right off the back, the Jazz. They got 3 really good, solid players. Most of them were considered lottery talents. They got Hendricks, they got George, and I can never pronounce his name. Sensabaugh? Is it Sensabaugh from Ohio? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, again, 3 really good players. You can't deny Houston. I was not necessarily the biggest Cam fan. You can't deny the fact that he was a top 10 talent. So to get him at 20, that's a win. Believe it or not, I really loved what Washington did. Washington is a team that's on full rebuild, right? And they swung for the fences on 2 incredibly talented guys with very high ceilings, and Bilal and Tristan Vucevic. Like, those 2 guys have extremely high ceilings. If you're going to take swings, that was the guys to take it on in the draft. I thought Washington did a really good job for what they're doing, right? Again, they're rebuilding. What is it that I have now? Jones, Poole, still have Kispert, who's brand new, who still has a rookie contract. Yep. Daniel Gafford, who I absolutely love. And they just added Bilal and Vucevic to that. So I really do think they did a great job. I love the Walker fit in Indiana. I don't know if they could have picked a better player to add to that starting 5 unit than Walker. Denver getting into the first round and getting another sniper in Julian Strawder. That rich get richer, man. The Denver picked exactly who they wanted. They got another sniper on that team that's going to fit that role perfectly. They've done a very good job in the draft the last 10 or so years. And believe it or not, as much as it pains me to say it, I thought Miami did a good job. And only because I feel like no one does a better job at drafting players that fit their scheme more than Miami. They're like the Patriots of basketball. Like, they just know, I'm going to pick this guy. He's going to fit perfectly to what we're doing here and that Miami culture, and he's going to be productive. That's why I don't trust Miami players in free agency, because I think a lot of them, especially some of the undrafted guys, there might be a product of that amazing system, and they just fit perfectly in it. I think that's the case with Jamie Hawkes. He's a great, talented player. Most people had him in the second round. Miami goes in and gets him, and he's probably going to do amazing in Miami because that's what Miami does.
They
They're
really
the
do.
best at drafting.
Well, it's like they get these around the edges guys. They come in and they contribute and they play winning basketball. And even if they're bad somewhere else, it's great for them from a Miami perspective because they all get paid. They all get
Sure.
contracts. Like they
Yep.
get the second contract. They get that get that stability that all NBA guys are looking for. I mean, yeah, I'm trying to decide where I want to start with what you said. I said a few weeks ago that the Wizards I thought were the worst franchise in the NBA and
Yep.
that they don't get enough credit for it for being awful all the time. And since then, they have done so many intelligent things that it's like I don't want to give myself a little too much credit here, but like, did I telepathically like get into their head somehow? Because I'm with you. Like, I think they're rebuilding, but they picked a direction more importantly. Like
Yes.
they didn't, between the Porzingis trade, between letting Kuzma go, they letting get even with the Bradley Beal return, maybe not being as great as it could have been. But how this all planned out would take it a swing on a younger guy like Jordan Poole still, who with a big contract, you have to pay somebody. Like it's just I like going to get Koulibaly. Like I think that's a really smart pick for them and getting a little extra out of it. Like again, this team is not going to win a lot of games next year. And I do think there is some irony in the fact that they decided to basically go in the tank the year after Wemby comes out. But look, they needed to pick a direction, and the direction that they've been doing for the better course of 15 years of just staying kind of afloat, maybe making the playoffs and getting to a first round or so. Like that's again, it's not where you want to be. And so I'm glad it feels like they have a plan for the first time in a
They
while.
do,
And that's more than we said about the Wizards.
And I felt like in the bad situation that they were in with Beal had a no trade contract, which means he basically had him hostage, right? He can just say, nope, I'm not waiving. So there wasn't a lot they can do there. Kristaps Porzingis, in my opinion, probably also could have held him hostage because he could have opted out. So he very easily could have said, either you trade me to someone that I want or I'm going to opt out. We don't know if that I have no insider knowledge, but that is a very possible scenario because you didn't get a ton in return for him when you consider the talent that he is. So it makes sense to me that they figure, well, let's we'll get something out of it. But then they go ahead and flip Chris Paul, get Jordan Poole, who's a very talented player. Right? He's only 24 years old. He can put up points. You take a stab at him, different environment, have him basically be the star of the team for the time being until your new rookies develop. And then you can flip him later on if you wanted to. So I think they did a very good job. I really like the swings that they took. I thought Bilal was the perfect draft for them because of his high ceiling, because of how talented he is, that this is the time that if you're going to swing and miss, do it now.
Yeah.
And I think that's what they did with both, because I think Tristan is also a very talented player that they were able to get in the second round.
They're home run swings, and that's what I like. Like there could go very left, and these guys could not pan out at all. Or it's the type of player like, I mean, sometimes you got to take the swing and get a safe player and get a single, right? Because there's some teams where it's more like you got your superstars in place. You don't want to strike out. You need to really make sure you fill out the rotation the correct way. The Wizards are in the position where they should be swinging for the fences. Like you have nothing in place right now, guaranteed. So yeah, take the guy with the high upside and with the most ceiling there. And that's how I feel about these picks. You're right. They're guys who, yeah, they might stink, but they might be a lot better than what they are where they got drafted at.
They can take the risk, right? They can take the risk at this situation. It's almost the opposite of what I felt like the Magic. I was more like, man, I really kind of hope the Magic go a safer route. They had 2 picks, maybe take one swing, but go one safe, because I felt like, all right, we already have our 2 studs. So there's no need to swing for the fences on both and then whiff. Like we couldn't afford a strikeout. We needed to do something, put the ball in play, right? To use baseball references. So that's how I felt about the Magic. With the Washington Wizards was the complete opposite. Go out there and just hack away and hope that something good happens. You strike lightning in the bottle. And again, I really have high hopes for both of their players, and I like the development of their team. Again, I really like Gafford. I think he's a very young, another 24-year-old player, protects the rim, high energy, athletic center. Corey Crisper has shown to be an elite level 3-point shooter. Again, they have some really good pieces. I want to see how Tyus Jones does as a full-time starter. He's great taking care of the ball. So for a young team to have a point guard that takes care of the ball, I see what they're trying to do. And kudos to them. They're one team that took too long to trade away. Very similar to Portland. They're taking too long to just say, you know what, it's not working. But we're back to Portland again, and we don't want to go that route.
Yeah, I mean, I know we have to get there eventually. I do think I love Tyus Jones' pickup for them for the reason you said. Like, I think he's going to teach them good habits, and it will be a good steady point guard for guys that are developing. Like, I think you need somebody who, when you're developing young guys, you don't want them to pick up bad habits. I feel like Tyus Jones is the type of player that prevents them from picking up bad habits. With Portland, with Scoot, I mean, I think he's got a lot of upside still, and there are young guys. I mean, Sharp showed me a lot last year. Anthony Simons, like you said, still on a good contract. It feels like they need to make a decision with Dame, and because it's playing out for the worst case scenario. I feel like everybody right now, because Dame could reset that rebuild and still has a ton of value. Like, we know Dame Lillard is still one of the better players in the league. Like, nothing could restart the rebuild faster, and he's a franchise legend. Like, he's arguably the best player in franchise history, so he doesn't even really need to feel bad about asking out. Yet there just continues to be this game of flirting and not flirting, and he said and she said. And Andy, I'm with you. I'm extremely tired of it. But I do got to give Portland credit. I think Scoot Henderson at 3 is a great pick. Like, I said on our pre-draft podcast with our buddy Chris Crawford that, like, I think he just, to me, he was the clear second best player in the draft. Like, I just think the upside is way higher. I know he's 6'2", which could lead to some maybe fatal defensive flaws, but I just love his aggression. I love his attitude. And Brandon Miller just feels like a safe kind of generic pick to me. I don't know. Brandon Miller just doesn't jump off the page.
I'm not the biggest Brandon Miller fan. I have my own reasons for that. I think he feasted a lot on really bad teams. I'm not saying he's not talented. He definitely is. I felt that Scoot was easily the second best player in that draft. I really felt it was Wemby, Scoot, and then, yes, possibly Miller, and then like 18 different guys.
Yeah.
Like, I really felt that the other tier was just huge. There wasn't a huge difference between, a Taylor Hendricks and a Kobe. Like, they're just, to me, there wasn't. They both had very similar ceilings in that aspect. I love what Portland did in the draft. You got Scoop, but then they also got Chris Murray. Chris Murray's a very talented power forward.
Yeah.
Right? They could potentially lose Grant, or they can re-sign him. I really liked their draft, but I also hated their draft because I felt like, what is the point of drafting Scoot if he's kind of going to come off the bench? Like, he's not starting there. Even if you flip Anthony, what are you going to do? You're going to play Dame at the 2? Because Scoot's really a 1. Right. He's a true 1.
Yeah.
But I love his talent. I think he's fantastic. I love the picks. I'm a little confused by it. I felt like Portland, really, this was the opportune time to blow it up and get as much for Dame as possible. And look, we love Dame. He hasn't played more than 60 games, in the last 4 seasons? So he is getting to it. Like, look, 1 year is one thing, but 4 years in a row where he's only playing like 60 or less. Now, mind you, probably last year, I'm sure he sat a lot of games that he was healthy for because they were trying to tank at some point.
Yeah, end of last year he was sitting out. But
the year before that was 29 because of the injury, and then the year before that was like 50 something.
I mean, he's a little more than the last 2 years have been rough. Last year he played 58. The year before that he played 29, like you said. The 2 years before that he played 67 and 66. And then he played 80 the year before that. So it's been declining for sure. Because I mean, between 2012 and 2018, he was good for no less than the lowest he ever had was 73.
And then he has a little bit of an injury. He's 29 years old, and now all of a sudden, every year he's not playing 60 plus games.
Yeah, I mean, Dame
already. So it's like
Dame is 32. That matters. And I mean, not everybody ages like LeBron James. Now, I think Damian Lillard also has a skill set that will age well. He's Steph Curry-esque in that sense, is where he can shoot the basketball. That will keep you afloat for a very long time. And that's part of what is so even more. God, I didn't want to go down this route, but here we are. Like, it's so frustrating because I want Damian Lillard to play meaningful basketball, and it's clearly not going to happen in Portland right now. And Portland has all but said it's not going to happen right now. We keep playing this game of chicken of whether we're going to retool the. Both of them know that they're not going to get what they want with each other, and they just need to break up. Like, it's better for both of them, and neither will be hurt. They'll both be better for it. That's what's crazy.
Yeah, like we all see it, right? I think I heard an analogy. It's like we all know that relationship. We have friends that are together. They were like, man, you guys really just shouldn't be together anymore. We see it.
Yeah.
But they just refuse to let each other go. I understand Portland. You have a megastar. As long as you continue to sell out and get money in the tickets, I'm sure they want to win, but more than that, I'm sure they want to get money.
Yeah, I just feel like
it's a business. So yeah,
I just hate it because winning is the ultimate ticket sale. You know what I mean? Like, look at how much value the Warriors have increased by, and obviously a little bit helps with being in the Bay too. But the value has increased since they've had this run with Steph, and I mean that's that's kind of my thing. But I get it. You have to have somebody who's willing to take the short term hit for the long term gain. That's easier said than done in a lot of people's eyes.
Clearly, they're not willing to do that. But
no,
I think everybody agrees that breakup needs to happen. And I feel bad for Portland fans because they're stuck. They're forced to be stuck in the middle.
Yeah.
Right. Like as a Magic fan, there is at least the excitement of these young guys and seeing that develop. Right. If you are in a contender team, the excitement of being great, right? You're going into next season fully knowing that you have no chance of winning and no chance of being horrible enough to land. I mean, they tried this year and it didn't happen for them. But they got Scoot, the second best player in the draft, and that was a great draft for them. I liked both of the players that they drafted. Getting back to the draft conversation, I really like both of the players that they drafted. I just don't understand what they did.
Yeah, we missed Chris Murray and Keegan Murray. I mean, Chris could have been a king one pick later. You could have the brothers reunited.
But they're twins too, right? I want to say they're twins as well.
Are they really?
We have to. I feel like they are twins. Now they look ridiculously alike.
How is that possible though? Or because Chris is out early?
Yeah,
so Keegan's out.
He came out after his sophomore year.
Oh yeah, I got to check. I didn't know if it was an eligibility thing because obviously they'd have to be the same year. But
no. And then Keegan only played his sophomore year, and then I'm going to try to look it up. Keegan only played his sophomore year, and Chris played up to his junior year.
All right. Well, while you're looking that up real quick, because I do want to get to the bottom of this. With Charlotte going, because I do want to switch gears now, because a part of you said the word excitement a bunch, and that's what I would think my main selling point was with Charlotte is not only am I a believer in Scoot, I look at the excitement that's been needed around that franchise for so long, and I go, man, no one's really fun to watch a backcourt of LaMelo Ball and Scoot Henderson. You know what makes me think, wow, I could have a lot of upside, that backcourt. And Brandon Miller is not even necessarily the wrong pick. Like, we haven't seen him play a game yet. I don't want to just be like instantly dump on the kid. From an X's and O's perspective, it does make sense. Like, Brandon Miller's a 6'9" wing. Like, he can play the 4 a little bit as well. You have a guard, you have a forward, like you're building out the roster. Charlotte is one of these teams that needs everything. So, but I don't know. To me, it feels like they drafted for fit instead of best player available. And that's just always a strategy that loses. And that's what this feels like it was for me.
When you're drafting that high or that early in the draft, I always feel as a BPA. If you're drafting in the lottery, you get BPA and then you forget about fit.
Yeah, you figure it out.
Unless the only caveat is if they're very similar, like if in your process of evaluation, you feel like, all right, these two guys are very close to each other, neck and neck, I will then look at fit, right? If the best player I have is a center and the one right next to him is a point guard, but I need a point guard, okay, then yes, I'm going to look at fit at that point. But I didn't think that was the case, and maybe they do, but I didn't think that was the case with Scoot and Miller. Miller does fit a need. They're about to lose, oh my God, Kelly. I'm forgetting his full name.
Oh, Oubre?
Yes. right? He's a free agent, so he was their starting small forward. Miles Bridges may not ever play for them again. At least
Yeah,
he
I
shouldn't.
don't know what. Yeah, I don't know what's going on there.
Not
Nothing
that
good.
route.
Nothing good is going on there.
And then you go ahead and sub him in with Brandon Miller. Essentially what you did. But okay, whatever. Let's ignore all that stuff. So that's the part that I didn't get why Miller. I don't get it. It's not. I really thought Scoot was the guy. I really hope it wasn't for fit. I hope that they just felt that Miller was that much better. And maybe they did. Maybe they really did. Maybe they just felt like, yeah, to us, Miller is the second best player and not Scoot. Okay, I would disagree. But I'm not the one making the draft choice, and good things, because I've made some bad picks in the past.
Well, again, it's like they're in a position where I feel like they should be trying to hit home runs, and they went to hit a single, and that's just I don't get why. And to me, I always went back to my qualms were, and this is what CC and I agreed on, is that when Alabama was the number one seed and number one ranked, and really, I don't want to base it only off the tourney, but that's kind of your chance to show out. Like, Anthony Davis, for example, look what he did the year he was going number one and took Kentucky to that title.
Paulo Banchero.
Yeah.
Look what he did in the tournament, right?
Right. Look at what Paulo did in the tournament. Look at what Kemba Walker did for his stock in the tournament. Like, you have guys that really show out and say, hey, I'm ready for the pros. Like, no matter what, I'm dominating this D1 talent. Like, I'm just a step above them. I don't feel like Brandon Miller did that in this past tournament. And that to me that was a major, again, who knows? Because if you believe the reports coming out of there, they liked him the whole time. He worked out personally in front of Jordan, which is a little weird because Jordan's selling the team. Like, I know it's Mike.
If you liked him the whole time, why did you have to work him out multiple times?
Right. And
I fool people like.
And that's not even, like you said, getting into all the red flags off the court and everything that happened over the year at Alabama. Like, I don't know. I just, again, maybe it's because I'm a believer in Scoop, but this just feels like a classic Hornets pick, and that it's going to be pretty much a letdown, and we're going to go, hey.
Another DJ Augustine over Brook Lopez.
Yeah, I'm kind of disappointed. And it feels like most of the fan bases too. I mean, some of those reaction videos are brutal. I feel bad for Brandon Miller in that regard, but I do. I don't know that. I'm just not as high on that pick. I think you mentioned him in your winners early on. I love Houston's draft. Like, they have a lot of fit issues as well, where it's like, hey, there's one ball there, and you've got Jalen Green, you got Kevin Porter Jr. But I think
they're a team with a ton of cap.
Yeah,
it's like 60, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, they have a ton of cap. Tremendous amount of young talent. And again, they just said, look, we're the worst team in the league, or second worst. We're just going to draft best available. And we're going to figure it out, because worst case scenario, we'll flip some of these young guys for other assets that flip, but we're going to look at them first.
Yeah.
And we're going to see who's real and who's not. We're going to make decisions. So I felt those were the right choices for them. Again, I wasn't as high on Cam, but Cam at 20
is a coup. Cam at 20 is a coup. And that was going to be my point. Like,
I mean, how bad of an interview had it been? Like,
I don't get it.
It must have been like horrible.
I think on Kevin O'Connor's board, he was as high as a 9. Like, he was and Nova's produced great talent recently. Like, that's not even me being like Philly hometown bias. Like, Nova's just churned out solid players recently. I'm stunned he slipped that low.
They have even their quote unquote not elite players have done well in the NBA. But I fell with Cam. I saw some of the red flags. Again, for a guy who's a scorer, 12 points per game. Yes, he shot well from deep. Yes, I understand he had some injury concerns early on. Nothing major, not enough. So I thought there were some concerns there. You can't deny the talent. I don't think there was 20 players that were better than him. So that's why I said, to me, Houston is a clear winner, because you got a top 10 guy. I had him around 9th or 10th in my depth chart. You got him at 20. Like, that's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
So good for them. Again, they were a winner. Jazz, to me, were another winner. They got 3 solid dudes.
Yeah.
I love Hendricks. I thought Hendricks was really being undervalued by people.
His value at 9 is incredible. Like, that's the thing is there. I think you have to take him at 9. Like, once Walker's off the board and Koulibaly's off the board and Anthony Black, like they to me were all kind of in that same tier. Even Wallace as well. I mean, we both, you know, and I both had Grady Dick a little bit higher than he went
Yeah.
at 13. I think that's a great pick for the Raptors there, him slipping down that far. But no, I really like, I mean, I think again, Amen Thompson, I think was a good pick for them at 4. Like that's a good, solid, safe pick. There's going to be some fit things to figure out, but that's what you do with young teams. Like we definitely have guys you work out and you see who's there this year and guys you maybe can move on from. And you know, like you said, ton of cap space. There's reports that they're going to throw a bunch of money around, whether it's at Harden, whether I've seen reports that they're going to go after the Bucks guys and try to like pinch Brooke Lopez and pinch Chris
I
Middleton,
think
maybe
Lopez
even
on that squad would be amazing.
yeah, and a good mentor for
I don't know
Şengün too.
about
I like
Harden.
Şengün as a young guy.
I love Şengün. But he's an offensive juggernaut. Like in the post, he is extremely dangerous. He's not really much of a defender. That's to say the least. So I think that's why I said someone like Brook Lopez will be great. I'm not a fan of Harden. Again, I kind of have him in that Trae Young piece where great player, great stats, just doesn't win.
Where do you think he's going? Not to, my bad, not to cut you off, but where do you think Harden's going?
I think he's going to stay in Philly. I don't, unless something miraculous happens, I can't foresee him going anywhere else. They're going to be able to offer him a ton of money. It's a good fit for them. Doc is gone. I'm sure that was behind the scenes somewhere. I feel like that's the place for him. So I don't foresee. I think Houston is more of a leverage move, and maybe his agents to try to get him a bigger payday.
Yeah.
But I do think that he sticks at Philly when it's all said and done.
It sure seems like Houston has soured on him recently.
As they should. As they should. I mean, look who you drafted. You're drafting these young, energetic guys. Harden's ball dominant, and he's a great passer, and he's got that talent, but he's still ball dominant. Jalen Green needs the ball, and Amen Thompson, that is where he's at his best when he is controlling that. I felt like when they the reasons why Jabari struggled was the lack of a real point guard. I feel like Jabari is a really great player. I think he's going to do a lot better than what his rookie season looked like. I think he suffered from not having a playmaker. I think he's going to look a lot better when he has someone like an Amen who's hopefully running the offense, and he does a good job since he's such a great creator and such a great passer. I think that's going to benefit him. I think that's going to benefit Jalen Green. So again, I really like the picks for Houston. I thought they did a really good job in the draft. Did you like the Detroit pick of Ausar Thompson?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's kind of a best player available thing, and that's where I go there is if you believe he's a step above kind of the rest of the foursome that I mentioned with the guys, you know, Black and Wallace and Koulibaly, et cetera, those guys, then I think you take him there at 5. You know, because like other than Cade Cunningham, you're at the point too where you want to see who you work out, who you build around, and you figure it out. And so I think if you think Thompson's the best player available there, then you take him. And so again, kind of maybe a safer pick. But I don't have any major qualms with it.
I like the pick. I felt similar to Orlando. They had lots of options. There wasn't really a pick that you can go, like that just doesn't make any sense. They have Ivy, they have Cade, and now that you just completed that trio in the backcourt with Thompson, right? Those are 3 stud athletes, stud players. Cade obviously has been injured in back-to-back seasons. Hopefully he comes back healthy. So I thought that was a good pick. I thought Walker would have been a good pick. I thought Hendricks would have been a good pick. There was multiple guys that I felt that they could have drafted that would have worked out well. So I thought it was a solid pick for them. So yeah, I think they did a good job.
Yeah, I mean, there's again, and not to pivot back to Harden real quick. I do think though he's probably coming back to Philly. The only sleeper team I want to mention, and the only one that I would keep an eye on, is watch the Clippers. The Clippers need a guard. They were tied into the Chris Paul rumors, and obviously that's off the table now. It makes a lot of sense if Harden just plays point there.
They'll have to drop a lot of money. So what? You send PG to which PG in Philly would be amazing for you.
I would gladly trade for Pete. I mean, there's deals floating around where I forget who would need to opt in, but I saw a deal earlier that would float. It would be Tobias and Harden for Paul George, Covington, and I forget the third player
Are you
that was
getting
in it.
that crumble cookie from LA Clippers?
I mean, maybe apparently they tweeted today that if Tobias stays for the season that we all get crumble cookies. So I guess maybe then
Look,
that's a win for the
not
city.
I know they're not a sponsor, but crumble cookie is one heck of a cookie. So
Orlando, man, or we're not going to go down this route because I can do this for a long time. But Orlando is nice because you have the two big chain ones in Crumble and Insomnia that everybody loves. But of course, you have Gideon's Bakehouse, the
yes.
one of the greatest cookies, probably the greatest cookie I've ever had in my life. Is there? It's two. It was the coffee cake cookie and the chocolate chip pistachio toffee cookie.
Okay,
Oh
so I've
my
had that one. I never
god!
had their coffee one, but I've had that one.
The coffee
Um,
one, I think they only sell at Disney now, so it's a pain
okay.
because it's at
I don't
Disney.
go.
It's
I ain't
always
going there.
busy. Yeah, but the OG one at the East End Market,
And the
oh
cookies and cream one
yeah, it's
that they
really
had.
good. Yeah,
That
it's incredible.
but
It
yeah, I'm a
melts.
big fan of crumble. They come warm. They're
Yeah.
just they're just they make you feel good.
I
It's a
like the
good
softer bake too. I'm a sucker for
yes.
that. Like that's a way to get me. So but we will see what happens with that. I appreciated his dad carrying Mad Water too as his agent and doing the work and putting the slop out himself. You got to appreciate dad sticking up.
Yeah.
No, that'd be the only other one I'd watch. I do want to end though, as we begin to wrap this up with your Magic.
Yep.
Talk about, because I think with them, like you said, a little more surprising in the way they drafted with going with Anthony Black, with going with Chet Howard, more just because we know the Magic have a glut of guards already. I agree with you in that their two main guys who they should be building around, of course, are Paulo Banchero and Franz Wagner. How do you expect to see all this shake out, I guess? Like, what do you think of the picks
Yeah,
themselves?
so
And what do you think is their impact on the rotation with guys like Cole Anthony, with Jalen Suggs, with Markelle? Like, who's staying and who's going here, I guess?
so I really came around Anthony Black, I would say about with a week or so to go into the draft. I was like, all right, let me continue to look into this guy. Because I read all the reports. I never questioned his talent. To me, the guy is ridiculously talented. It was more of like the fit, right? And at 6, do you draft for best talent or do you look at fit? Like I said earlier, if I felt the talent was neck and neck with another individual, then I'm going to go with the one that I think is a better fit. Because if there wasn't a huge difference between, for example, him and Hendricks, well, I'm going to go towards Hendricks. Hendricks fits a better need as a 3-4, high-level shooter, great defender. He wasn't that much better than Hendricks, in my opinion, so I would have gone with Hendricks. However, that being said, the biggest issue with the Magic last year was starting 5-20. We started 5-20 because we did not have any kind of point guard play. The moment Markelle Fultz came, this team was night and day, right? This is not the fan talking. These are the numbers, right? I think they ended up being like the 8th or 9th best team in the entire league after December 22nd or whenever it was that Markelle came. Those are numbers. That's not fanhood, right? So you're adding a guy who's 6'7", and I know we talked about, the Magic have a lot of guards, but do they? So they have Markelle Fultz who's up for an extension. Gary Harris, whose current year is non-guaranteed. They have until the Friday to pick it up, if I'm not mistaken. They have Cole on a rookie contract who's up for that first extension. And then they have Suggs. Those are their main 4 guards. Okay. Well, Anthony can play 3 from a defensive standpoint. So if we're looking at the bench unit, as far as when you're answering your question on rotation, you can play him on a 3 from the defensive standpoint. Let him run the offense, which he's excellent at. And you're just giving him a great shooter in Cole next to him and Suggs next to him, who is just like the feistiest, hard playing individual on the court right now for the Magic. So he can play next to them. So from a depth perspective, I don't see the clog like a lot of people see, because next year you basically only have one point guard on the contract, only one guard on the contract. So yes, decisions need to be made. I thought it was a great move for that. Again, the talent is there. He does impact winning. Arkansas was plus 10 points when he was on the floor. Like, he is a guy who plays well. I like the pick. I wasn't enamored with it, but I really liked the pick. The one that I thought was a little bit off, and I can't deny it, was Jet Howard. Again, not the talent. I just felt he wasn't best available at 11. I have both Grady and Hawkins as better shooting guards with them. However, when you look into things deeper, when you take the emotion out of the equation, Howard's legit. Like, he's a legit offensive player, right? He reminds me of a Mike Miller. He reminds me a little bit of a Tobias Harris in the sense that he could potentially be a 3-4 depending on how his body grows. Because he's not the greatest athlete. Neither one of those guys were great athletes, but his offensive game is great. His footwork is impeccable. He's a great catch and shoot guy. So again, I like the fit for the Magic. They did address a need with a very talented player. My favorite player, I was not shy about this, was Hawkins. I felt like Hawkins was the best shooting guard. I just love the way he plays. I loved him in college. I love the way he runs around screens. There's a lot to like. What I like personally in a player in Hawkins. So it wasn't my favorite pick for the Magic, but it does answer a need. He does come with a lot of talent, and time will tell, right? We will see what he's like in a couple of years. We'll see how Grady is like and how Hawkins is like. I've been wrong in the past, so hopefully I'm wrong on that one. Not that I think Howard's going to be a bad player, not at all. I think he's going to be very good. We'll see if he ends up being better than the other two guys.
Yeah, I think regardless of how Jet Howard turns out, I think you're 100% right about Jordan Hawkins. Like, Jordan Hawkins, to me, just, again, I used the tourney analogy for Brandon Miller earlier. Jordan Hawkins stood out in the tourney. Like, I think there's a reason he jumped up these boards late. Like you said, he can shoot the basketball. I think that's the most important. Yeah, it was high on Grady Dick as well. I think that was a good pick for the Raptors. We'll see if he can kind of play that 3-4, like you said. And I think the other thing with the Magic too that's worth talking about is, I mean, Markel's up for contract next year. Like, could be the last year of Markel. Both he and Jalen Suggs, while they've been great when they played, I think there's a pretty fair injury risk there at this point. So in a way,
Cole Anthony has been injured all 3 seasons.
Yeah.
So again, those are things that you now you're bringing a guy who's 6'7", bigger build, right? Can run the offense very well. So again, I understand why he's attractive. And again, the talent is there. We'll see how that shot develops. But even without a great shot, he still impacts the game in so many ways that I do like the pick. I would have hated the pick if then at 11 we go with another non-shooter. But we didn't. We got Howard. So I'd like to judge these picks as a combo. And you walked away with guys who are highly talented and fit needs for the Magic. They both answer needs. We need a true lead guard. Cole Anthony has been doing that job, but he's really such an explosive scorer, more so than someone who's setting up your offense. And you needed to add shooting, and you did that. So for that, as a fan, I'm very happy. And I think if I take my bias out of the way, it was a smart decision. Again, I'll argue that I thought Hawkins and Grady were better overall shooting guards, but not by much. So maybe they just liked Howard better, liked the size better. I'm a big fan of pedigree, right? I'm a big fan of individuals that come from professionals. All those things come into play. So they have access to the one things as analysts and journalists we don't have, which is the interviews. That to me is a big part of this drafting process, and that's the one thing that people like you and me just don't have access to. So we don't know what that's like. And the Magic are very big on chemistry. They're very big on family culture. I'm not saying any of the other individuals are not those kind of people, but maybe they just felt that Jet Howard just was a better fit from that perspective. And that chemistry plays a big dividend when it comes to the success of the team.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned your 2 guys. I mean, Paulo Banchero was hype on Twitter about it. Like, he seemed to be pretty happy about the picks, especially with young teams. Like, if they grow together, they build that chemistry, they'll only pay dividends in the future. Thank you, everybody, for listening to this episode of the Drive and Dish NBA podcast. Appreciate you guys, as always. Appreciate my guy, Andy Jordan, for coming on the episode. A lot of fun. Make sure you follow Andy on Twitter at Andy's Magic Minute. Of course, he will be back on the podcast here at some point. We will be checking in with our pal, my co-host, Justin Cousart, a little later in the week. As free agency gets underway, I'm excited to get back on with him. I mean, it's NBA. Look, we know something crazy is going to happen. This episode, I guess free agency is about in a day and a half from when this episode will be dropping. So, like we said, as soon as it's 6 o'clock hits, we're going to be off, no doubt about that. In the meantime, listen to the podcast anywhere you find a podcast, and you can watch the show on YouTube. Just search Drive and Dish NBA podcast, and we are there.